You may think betrayal happens by chance. You may believe that lies, manipulation, or abandonment appear out of nowhere without any warning signs. But the truth that Machiavelli and Carl Jung understood long before our time is this: people always reveal their true nature before they act. Always. The problem is not that people perfectly hide their intentions. The real problem is that most people refuse to see what makes them uncomfortable. They choose to believe appearances, comforting words, polite smiles, and reassuring promises. And while they fall asleep inside that illusion, others quietly learn to read the invisible cracks in the human soul. Write in the comments, "I will learn to see what others miss." Because this video isn't just about manipulation or psychology. It will teach you why some people instantly sense danger in someone, while others keep getting destroyed by the same toxic personalities over and over again. So subscribe, like this video, and stay until the end, because the final truth you're about to hear could permanently change the way you look at human beings. For centuries, certain knowledge was passed down in the shadows of forbidden books, political palaces, and the offices of great psychologists. Machiavelli studied the royal courts of Italy the way a surgeon studies an open wound. He realized that people are almost never driven by what they say, but by what they hide. Centuries later, Carl Jung explored the deepest layers of the human unconscious and uncovered an even more disturbing truth. Every human being wears a social mask, but also carries a shadow they desperately try to hide. And it is inside that shadow that betrayal, manipulation, jealousy, and silent destruction are born. Our modern world suffers because it has replaced careful observation with emotional reactions. People look at appearances, but they no longer notice contradictions. They listen to words while ignoring the tiny signals that reveal what's really happening inside someone. This wisdom has been forgotten because it forces people to face uncomfortable truths. Learning to read people also means facing your own illusions, your own blind spots, and sometimes even the darkest parts of yourself that you've refused to acknowledge. You spend a huge part of your life surrounded by people who say a lot, but reveal very little. Yet, their true intentions constantly leak through invisible details that almost nobody notices. Machiavelli saw this in political courts. Jung discovered it in the depths of the unconscious mind. The harder someone tries to control their image, the more their true nature eventually speaks for them. The strategies you're about to discover are not just meant to help you avoid traitors. They are designed to help you see people as they truly are behind their roles, their performed emotions, and their social masks. The first silent strategy for reading people is to observe what they protect with excessive intensity. Most people reveal their greatest weakness through the very thing they defend the most aggressively. A man who constantly repeats that he is loyal often carries a deep fear of being seen as a traitor. A person who constantly demands respect may be trying to bury an old humiliation they have never healed from. Jung explained that the ego builds defense mechanisms to cover its deepest emotional wounds. Machiavelli understood that a wise ruler should always pay close attention to what people desperately try to protect, because that is where their true emotional center is found. Watch for reactions that seem far too intense. Pay attention to the topics that immediately trigger anger, discomfort, or endless self-justification. Those reactions are rarely rational. They are inner alarms. People can control their words, but they have a much harder time controlling their unconscious defenses. The more someone tries to convince you of their moral character, the more careful you should be. People who are truly confident in who they are rarely feel the need to keep reminding everyone else. This principle becomes unsettling once you begin applying it to your own life. You suddenly realize that some people have been revealing their true intentions from the very beginning, but your need to feel reassured kept you from seeing them clearly. Many betrayals could have been avoided if people had learned to pay attention to emotional reactions instead of polished speeches, because the unconscious always speaks before the mask does. The second silent strategy for reading people is to study how someone treats those they have nothing to gain from. People often play a role around those they admire, desire, or fear, but their true nature comes out when they are with someone they see as unimportant. Machiavelli had already observed that power rarely changes a person, it simply unmasks them. Jung explained that the shadow emerges when the ego no longer feels the need to maintain a moral facade. That is why some people become cold toward the weak, arrogant toward strangers, or disrespectful toward those who have nothing to offer them. Their true inner hierarchy is revealed without any filter. Pay close attention to how someone speaks to waiters, drivers, employees, shy people, or those society barely notices. Watch how they treat someone who has no status at all. Many people use kindness as a social strategy rather than as a genuine value. As long as there is something to gain emotionally, financially, or socially, they remain polite. But the moment that benefit disappears, their true psychological nature begins to surface. This becomes especially important in romantic relationships, friendships, and business partnerships, because one day, you too will temporarily stop being useful to someone. And on that day, you'll discover whether they truly cared about you or whether they were simply maintaining a relationship that benefited them. People reveal their true character in the moments when they believe no one is watching. That is where real human understanding begins. The third silent strategy for reading people is to notice the contradictions between emotions and words. Words are easy to fake. Emotions are much harder to hide. Someone may congratulate you while showing a brief flash of irritation across their face. They may claim to be happy for your success, yet their energy suddenly changes the moment you share good news. Jung believed that every person is internally divided between the image they want to project and what they truly feel. That inner conflict constantly creates emotional inconsistencies. Machiavelli already knew that a clear-minded person should never rely only on what people officially declare. Instead, they should observe the invisible tension that surrounds those words. When someone lies, part of their body often continues telling the truth. Their eyes become unsteady. Their voice shifts ever so slightly. The rhythm of their speech changes. Some people smile with their mouths, but not with their eyes. Others become strangely over-enthusiastic, as if they are forcing an emotion that doesn't naturally exist. Most people completely miss these signals because they listen through the lens of their emotional needs instead of seeing with clarity. They want to believe. That is why they get manipulated. The more you develop this skill of observation, the more you realize that human relationships are like one enormous psychological stage play. Many people perform a role to protect their social image, but very few can completely control the emotional energy that gives them away. This is where the cracks begin to show. A hidden jealousy, a buried anger, a silent frustration, a rivalry disguised as affection. And once you begin noticing these contradictions, you can never look at human interactions the same way again. You realize that people's true intentions almost never live in their words. They live in the gaps between what they say and what they reveal. The fourth silent strategy for reading people is to observe who they become once they finally gain a psychological advantage over you. Many people seem kind, respectful, or caring only because they are in a weaker position, but the moment they feel emotionally, socially, or financially superior, their behavior changes dramatically. Machiavelli saw this transformation as one of the most reliable signs of human nature. Jung viewed it as the gradual release of the shadow once social restraints begin to disappear. That is why some people become controlling the moment they feel desired, admired, or needed. Watch these subtle changes carefully. Some people start replying more slowly just to create a power imbalance. Others suddenly become more critical, distant, or sarcastic. Some even use your emotional attachment to test how much control they can have over you. The most dangerous part is that many victims see these behaviors as emotional accidents instead of recognizing them as part of a much deeper psychological pattern. The truth is, power shines a harsh light on the human soul. It reveals the hidden instincts that weakness once kept under control. A truly healthy person does not try to dominate or manipulate others simply because they have an advantage. They remain steady. But emotionally unstable people often become intoxicated by the feeling of power. If you fail to understand this principle, you may mistake psychological control for genuine affection. Many people realize too late that they were only loved because they were difficult to reach. The moment they become emotionally available, the respect slowly begins to disappear. That is why learning to recognize the changes that power creates becomes a silent weapon against modern manipulation. The fifth silent strategy for reading people is to understand that people often reveal their future intentions through the way they talk about others. Someone who constantly destroys the reputation of people who aren't present is already unconsciously showing you how they will speak about you once you're gone. Machiavelli knew that human alliances are rarely stable because many people change their loyalty according to whatever serves their emotional interests at the moment. Jung explained that people often project onto others the dark qualities they refuse to acknowledge within themselves. That is why some people constantly accuse others of being manipulative while they are the ones doing the manipulating. Some endlessly complain about jealousy while they are consumed by it themselves. Others talk about betrayal all the time because that possibility already exists inside their own minds. Pay close attention to everyday conversations. People reveal far more about themselves than they realize. The way they judge others exposes their deepest inner obsessions. Someone who cannot keep a secret today will not suddenly become trustworthy tomorrow just because they like you. Someone who constantly humiliates people behind their backs already has a dangerous pattern when it comes to relationships. Yet many people ignore these warning signs because they feel temporarily valued for being on the right side of the conversation. They believe they are somehow different in the manipulator's eyes, but deep psychological patterns rarely change that quickly. People carry their true nature everywhere they go. And very often, tomorrow's conflicts are already visible in the way someone treats other people long before you become the target. Write in the comments, words always reveal the hidden shadow. Because the day you truly understand this, you finally begin listening to people with open eyes instead of listening through your need to be loved. The sixth silent strategy for reading people is to observe how someone reacts when you stop feeding their psychological needs. Many modern relationships are not built on love, respect, or loyalty. They are built on invisible dependency. Some people crave constant attention. Others need to be admired, validated, desired, or emotionally dominant. As long as you keep feeding that need, they remain warm, present, and engaged. But the moment you take a step back, regain your inner independence, or stop providing that emotional fuel, their true nature begins to emerge. Machiavelli understood that people become dangerous when their interests are no longer being satisfied. Jung explained that relationships quickly expose unconscious wounds connected to scarcity, abandonment, and the need for control. That is why some people suddenly become cold when you stop chasing them. Others immediately try to provoke an emotional reaction from you. Some create tension, silence, or unnecessary conflict simply to see whether they still have influence over your mind. The most unsettling part is that many people mistake this behavior for passionate love, when in reality, it may be nothing more than psychological dependency. A mentally and emotionally healthy person does not panic when you regain your inner balance. They don't need to manipulate your attention in order to feel important. But people who are ruled by their inner emptiness often see your independence as a personal threat. That is exactly when the masks begin to fall. Because the moment you withdraw your emotional energy, you discover whether the relationship was built on genuine connection or on silent emotional consumption. The seventh silent strategy for reading people may be the most disturbing of them all. People often reveal their true face once they believe they have completely figured you out. At the beginning of a relationship, almost everyone carefully manages their image. Their actions are measured. Their words are carefully chosen. Their flaws remain hidden behind an attractive mask. But over time, a dangerous illusion begins to appear. People start believing you won't leave. They assume you'll tolerate certain behaviors. They become convinced that they already have you emotionally. And it is often at that exact moment that their deepest psychological nature begins to surface. Machiavelli had already observed that people stop being cautious once they feel secure in their position. Jung explained that the social mask gradually exhausts the human mind. No one can play a role forever without eventually revealing their true self. That is why some people suddenly become careless, disrespectful, or manipulative after months or even years. Not because they suddenly changed, but because they stopped hiding certain parts of themselves. Watch this pattern carefully. Many people reveal who they truly are once they believe they no longer need to win you over psychologically. Some stop listening. Others become controlling. Some begin showing a coldness they had previously kept hidden. And this is where many people end up emotionally destroying themselves, because they stay attached to the first version of that person instead of accepting the one standing in front of them now. The hardest truth to accept is this: people rarely show you who they really are at the beginning. First, they show you who they believe they need to be in order to earn your trust. Then, little by little, their true nature rises to the surface. Learning to recognize that transition before it's too late can literally save your inner peace. You may still believe that human relationships are built mainly on visible emotions, clear intentions, and honest words. But beneath every social interaction, invisible forces are at work, forces that most people refuse to face. Jung called it the shadow. Machiavelli called it human nature. Yet both understood one essential truth: human beings often hide their most dangerous instincts behind their most beautiful appearances. The first forbidden truth about human nature that you must face is this: many people don't truly want you to be happy. They mainly want to see whether your happiness ever surpasses theirs. That difference may seem subtle, but it changes everything. Jung explained that human beings naturally compare themselves to others on an unconscious level. The ego is constantly measuring its own worth by comparing itself to the people around it. That is why some people genuinely seem happy for you until your success becomes impossible to ignore. At first, they encourage you because your growth still feels theoretical. But once your achievements begin changing your energy, your status, or your inner confidence, something shifts in the way they look at you. Machiavelli had already observed that people struggle to tolerate those who silently remind them of their own limitations. This truth becomes even more painful in close relationships, because the most dangerous attacks rarely come from strangers. They often come from people who grew up with you, worked beside you, or shared important chapters of your life. Your growth becomes a brutal mirror, reflecting the dreams they abandoned long ago. That is why some relationships mysteriously grow colder when you begin succeeding, healing, or becoming more self-aware. Many people don't hate your happiness itself. They hate what your happiness reveals about their own lack of progress. And most of the time, they don't even realize it. Very few people will openly admit they are jealous. Instead, their ego invents other explanations. They become more distant, more critical, more sarcastic, less present. Some may even unconsciously try to slow you down just to restore a psychological balance that makes them feel comfortable again. Understanding this should not make you paranoid. It should simply teach you one cold truth: not everyone will survive your inner transformation. The second forbidden truth about human nature that you need to understand is this: many people prefer emotional comfort over the truth. People often claim they want honesty, but in reality, most are searching for comforting illusions that protect their ego. Jung explained that the human mind constantly creates defense mechanisms to avoid psychological pain. Machiavelli knew that people often prefer reassuring appearances over uncomfortable truths. That is exactly why manipulators are so successful. They tell people what they want to hear. They offer easy answers, instant emotional rewards, and comforting promises. Meanwhile, people who see clearly make others uncomfortable. They challenge. They confront. They force others to face parts of themselves they have been avoiding for years. This pattern exists everywhere: in romantic relationships, in families, in friendships, even across entire societies. Many people would rather surround themselves with familiar lies than face a truth that could completely reshape their identity. That is why some people become defensive or even angry when you calmly show them a reality they refuse to accept. It isn't always the truth itself that makes them angry. It's the fact that the truth threatens the image they have built of themselves. The more emotionally useful an illusion is, the more fiercely the ego will fight to protect it. And once you understand this, it completely changes the way you see human conflict. You suddenly realize that many arguments aren't really about the facts. They're about the psychological survival of fragile identities. Some people even lie to themselves for years just to preserve a sense of inner control. And that is exactly where the greatest forms of mass manipulation are born. People become incredibly easy to control when they choose emotional comfort over clear thinking. That is why learning to tolerate uncomfortable truths has become one of the rarest forms of psychological strength in the modern world. The third forbidden truth about human nature that you must reclaim is this: many relationships are built less on love than on unconscious needs. Jung discovered that human beings constantly project their wounds, emotional voids, and unresolved desires onto other people. Machiavelli observed that human alliances change quickly once emotional interests disappear. That is why some relationships appear deep when they are actually driven by invisible psychological exchanges. Some people stay close to you because you make them feel safe. Others stay because you make them feel important. Some love the stability you bring into their inner chaos. Others simply enjoy the way your presence feeds their ego. As long as those needs continue to be met, the relationship seems strong. But the day you change, the day you heal, or the day you unconsciously stop playing the role they expected from you, the relationship begins to crack. That is when many people discover a painful truth. They were never loved for who they truly were. They were loved for the psychological role they played in someone else's life. That is why some people disappear once you're no longer vulnerable. Others leave when you become more independent. And others drift away the moment you stop giving them constant validation. This realization destroys many modern illusions about love and friendship because most people are unaware of the unconscious needs driving their attachments. They believe they love freely, when in reality, they are often trying to soothe old emotional wounds. Understanding this does not mean that every relationship is fake. It simply means that the rarest relationships are the ones that can survive the inner transformation of both people. Many attachments fall apart the moment the psychological roles begin to change, because beneath the visible emotions, the unconscious is constantly negotiating silent needs that very few people have the courage to face. The fourth forbidden truth about human nature that you must accept is this: most people don't truly fear evil. They fear social rejection. Machiavelli had already realized that people quickly change their behavior depending on the opinions of the group. Jung explained that human beings have a deep psychological need to belong. That is why so many people betray their own convictions the moment they feel social pressure. Most people don't follow the crowd because they genuinely believe in it. They follow because they are afraid of being rejected, mocked, or left out. Watch human behavior carefully whenever people are in groups. Some individuals suddenly become far more cruel when others are around. Others join in humiliating someone even though they would never have dared to do it alone. Some stay silent about important truths simply to protect their social standing. This single pattern explains countless silent betrayals. Deep down, many people know that a situation is unfair, toxic, or destructive, yet they remain passive. Why? Because their fear of being excluded is stronger than their desire to be honest. This truth becomes unsettling once you realize how much people reshape their personalities just to keep their place within a group. Some people even abandon their deepest values just to avoid psychological loneliness. That is why manipulators almost always try to control public opinion before controlling individuals. They know that very few people have the mental strength to remain clear-minded when they risk social isolation. And the more you observe this mechanism, the more you understand why crowds can become dangerous. A person standing alone may still have a conscience. A frightened group often has nothing left but instinct. Understanding this teaches you a cold but essential truth. Most people do not follow what is right. They follow whatever allows them to remain accepted. The fifth forbidden truth about human nature that you need to see clearly is this: many people would rather control than understand. Jung explained that the ego constantly tries to reduce uncertainty in order to protect its illusion of inner safety. Machiavelli understood that the need for control silently drives a huge part of human behavior. That is why some people become anxious when they can no longer understand your reactions, your thoughts, or your intentions. Psychological mystery deeply unsettles those who are ruled by the need for emotional dominance. Some people cannot stand not knowing where they stand in your mind. They want to know how attached you are, how you feel, what your weaknesses are, what you fear, and where your limits lie. Why? Because that information gives them a sense of psychological control. Watch this carefully in modern relationships. Many conflicts do not come from a lack of love. They come from a lack of control. Some people become aggressive when you grow quieter, more independent, or harder to read. Others constantly try to trigger emotional reactions just to make sure they still have an effect on you. And the most dangerous part is that these patterns are often unconscious. Many people believe they are simply emotionally attached, when in reality, they are dependent on the emotional control they have over others. That is why truly free people can be deeply unsettling. They become unpredictable. They stop reacting automatically to familiar emotional manipulation. They reclaim their inner center. And that psychological independence threatens people who are used to controlling relationships through guilt, attention, or the fear of loss. Write in the comments, "I refuse to be manipulated." End quote. Because the moment you understand this dynamic, you slowly stop confusing emotional intensity with genuine connection. The sixth forbidden truth about human nature that you must face is this. Many people cannot tolerate clarity in others because it directly threatens their unconscious patterns. Jung explained that human beings fiercely protect the illusions that keep them psychologically stable. Machiavelli knew that a person who sees clearly becomes difficult to manipulate and therefore naturally disturbing to those who depend on emotional control. That is why some people begin to feel uncomfortable when you develop a deeper understanding of human behavior. They notice that you observe more, that you react less impulsively, that you detect the silent contradictions they once believed you would miss. And this transformation completely changes the invisible balance of power. Many manipulators lose their influence the moment they realize that you can finally see how their methods work. Some people then become strangely aggressive, sarcastic, or distant for no obvious reason. But the truth is, your behavior is not what bothers them. What bothers them is that they can no longer affect you as easily as they once did. Watch this pattern carefully. People driven by the need for emotional dominance are naturally drawn to those who are naive, predictable, and emotionally dependent. Those people are easier to control. But when someone becomes emotionally grounded, clear-minded, and difficult to influence, they disrupt toxic relationship dynamics. That is why the most self-aware people often experience sudden breakups or unexpected distance in certain relationships. Their awareness shines a cold light on invisible psychological games, and many people would rather run from that light than be seen for who they truly are. Understanding this keeps you from blaming yourself when certain people suddenly change after your own inner growth. Because sometimes you are not becoming difficult. Your level of awareness has simply reached a point where the hidden mechanisms they once used to control you no longer work. The seventh forbidden truth about human nature that you need to understand is probably the darkest of them all. People forgive openly admitted wrongdoing more easily than they forgive quiet superiority. Machiavelli noticed that people struggle to tolerate anyone who silently reminds them of their own shortcomings. Jung explained that the human shadow reacts aggressively toward anything that threatens the image the ego has built of itself. That is why some people become hostile, not because you have harmed them, but simply because your presence exposes something they have been trying to escape within themselves. A disciplined person makes lazy people uncomfortable. A calm person unsettles chaotic minds. Someone with genuine self-respect threatens those trapped in self-destruction. Most of the time, this happens completely outside their awareness. Very few people will openly admit that they feel psychologically inferior to someone else. Instead, their ego transforms that discomfort into criticism, sarcasm, rejection, or quiet contempt. That is why some people suddenly become cold toward you for no obvious reason after you begin changing from the inside. You didn't turn against them. You simply stopped reinforcing the illusions they needed in order to feel comfortable. This truth explains countless human conflicts that seem impossible to understand. Many relationships begin to fall apart when one person grows internally faster than the other, because psychological growth naturally creates invisible tension. It changes emotional balance. It changes dependency. It changes the silent hierarchies that once held the relationship together. Understanding this should not make you arrogant. It should simply teach you that clarity comes with a price. The deeper your understanding of human nature becomes, the more certain people will instinctively sense that you are slowly breaking free from the collective illusions that govern their minds. Most people spend their entire lives reacting emotionally without ever understanding the invisible forces shaping their relationships. They trust too quickly, they ignore silent warning signs, and they recognize manipulation only after the damage has already been done. Yet there are mental tools that can completely transform the way you read human behavior. Not so you become cold, but so you never become blind again. The first mental weapon against human manipulation that you must develop is strategic silence after an important emotional revelation. Most people speak immediately after being surprised, hurt, attracted, or provoked. They feel an almost irresistible urge to fill emotional silence with words. Machiavelli understood that people reveal the most when they believe they control the pace of an interaction. Jung explained that silence acts as an extraordinarily powerful psychological mirror. That is why manipulators often dislike people who can remain calm after an emotionally tense moment. When someone attacks you, criticizes you, or tries to provoke an immediate reaction, they are rarely trying to communicate. More often, they are trying to take emotional control of the situation. The more impulsively you react, the more information they gather about your fears, your emotional wounds, and your psychological limits. But when you stay silent for just a few seconds longer than expected, something unusual happens. Many people begin filling the silence themselves. They talk more. They start explaining themselves. They reveal contradictions. Some even become nervous because they can no longer read what is going on inside you. And that loss of control often causes them to unintentionally reveal their true intentions. Pay close attention to people who cannot tolerate silence. Many feel an immediate need to regain emotional control of the conversation. They want to know what you think, how you feel, whether they affected you or not. That is why deliberately slowing down your reactions becomes an incredibly powerful psychological weapon. Calm, intentional silence deeply unsettles manipulators because it cuts off their direct access to your inner world. And in a world where almost everyone reacts impulsively, the person who masters their own reactions already holds an invisible advantage. The second mental weapon against human manipulation that you must master is observing behavioral patterns instead of emotional excuses. Most people get trapped because they judge relationships based on how they feel in the moment instead of studying deeper patterns. Jung explained that unconscious behaviors repeat themselves until they become obvious to the person who observes with clarity. Machiavelli believed that human habits were far more reliable than speeches or promises. That is why someone who lies once may still deserve understanding. But someone who repeatedly falls into the same patterns gradually reveals their true psychological structure. Pay attention to recurring behaviors. Someone consistently ignores your needs but expects your immediate attention. Someone repeatedly becomes distant after getting what they wanted emotionally. Someone makes you feel guilty every time you set a healthy boundary. At first, every incident seems isolated. Your mind searches for reasonable explanations. They're tired. They're stressed. The timing was bad. But when the same behaviors keep returning in different forms, they are no longer emotional accidents. They are part of a stable psychological pattern. And this is exactly where many people refuse to face the truth, because recognizing a repeated pattern often means questioning the image they had of someone. That is why so many people remain trapped in destructive relationships. They analyze each situation separately instead of recognizing the overall pattern. Manipulators benefit greatly from this human weakness. They know that one emotional apology is often enough to temporarily erase another person's emotional memory. But someone who sees clearly pays attention to patterns before promises. They watch for consistency over time. Because people rarely change through words alone. They change only when their inner psychological structure truly changes. And that kind of transformation is far rarer than emotions would have you believe. The third mental weapon against human manipulation that you must develop is the ability to distinguish between emotional intensity and genuine sincerity. Many people end up being controlled because they mistake powerful emotions for authentic connection. Jung explained that certain personalities unconsciously use emotional intensity to create rapid psychological dependency. Machiavelli already knew that powerful emotions often cloud rational judgment. That is why manipulators frequently try to speed up emotional attachment. They create artificial closeness, rush into personal confessions, make exaggerated declarations, or generate emotional highs and lows that leave the mind disoriented. And most people mistake that intensity for genuine depth. Yet truly healthy relationships usually grow through stability, not emotional chaos. Watch people who suddenly switch from extreme warmth to unexpected coldness. Some unconsciously use this instability to create a form of emotional addiction. Your mind becomes obsessed with getting back the positive moments you experienced at the beginning. That is exactly why toxic relationships can become so difficult to leave. They operate on the same psychological principle as unpredictable rewards. Your brain stays attached to the hope that another emotional high is coming. Meanwhile, your ability to think clearly slowly fades. Emotional manipulators instinctively understand this mechanism, even if they have no formal knowledge of psychology. They know that intense emotions often weaken rational thinking. That is why learning to slow yourself down internally is so important. A sincere person does not constantly create emotional storms just to keep your attention. They gradually build psychological stability. But relationships based on emotional control need constant intensity in order to survive. And once you finally understand that difference, you stop automatically treating powerful emotions as proof of authenticity. You begin paying attention to the inner peace someone brings into your life instead of the emotional explosions they create. The fourth mental weapon against human manipulation that you must develop is the conscious mastery of your psychological boundaries. Machiavelli knew that people are constantly testing the invisible boundaries of others. Jung explained that individuals ruled by their shadow naturally seek out people who cannot clearly protect their inner space. That is why manipulators rarely begin with major psychological abuse. They move forward little by little. A small intrusion, a subtle guilt trip, an unreasonable request disguised as affection, a disrespectful remark presented as just a joke. Then they watch. They carefully observe how far they can go before meeting any real resistance. Many people believe that setting boundaries will destroy their relationships. In reality, boundaries mainly destroy relationships that depend on emotional exploitation. And that truth is deeply uncomfortable because it forces you to realize that some relationships existed only because you couldn't say no. Pay close attention to what happens when you calmly establish a psychological boundary. Healthy people try to understand. Manipulators try to make you feel guilty. Some become cold. Others play the victim. Some try to convince you that you're overreacting or that you've changed for the worse. Why? Because a clear boundary limits their access to your emotional energy. And many people struggle to cope with losing psychological control. That is why learning to maintain your boundaries without anger is such an essential mental weapon. You do not have to become aggressive to become difficult to manipulate. You simply need to remain steady when someone tries to invade your inner space. Because manipulators quickly recognize people who fear conflict more than they fear emotional destruction. And as long as that fear controls your mind, some people will continue, often unconsciously, to use your kindness against you. The fifth mental weapon against human manipulation that you need to develop is the ability to temporarily tolerate being misunderstood without feeling the need to immediately defend yourself. Most people become easy to manipulate because they have an overwhelming need to be understood, validated, or loved. Jung explained that the ego constantly seeks external approval to stabilize its inner identity. Machiavelli understood that anyone who depends emotionally on other people's opinions becomes incredibly easy to control. That is why manipulators often use guilt, silence, or vague accusations to keep their victims trapped in a cycle of constant self-defense. Watch this pattern carefully. Some people intentionally create emotional discomfort simply to make you chase after their approval. They suddenly become cold without explanation. They drop subtle hints. They make vague accusations without ever clearly stating the real issue. Why? Because they know that most people struggle with the idea of being misunderstood or viewed negatively. So their target immediately starts explaining, defending themselves, trying desperately to be understood. And at that exact moment, the psychological balance of power shifts, because the person who desperately tries to repair their image has quietly handed over their emotional power. That is why learning to tolerate, even temporarily, someone else's negative opinion of you becomes an extraordinary strength. A psychologically grounded person does not feel compelled to clear up every misunderstanding immediately. They observe first. They analyze the real intentions behind the emotional tension. Most importantly, they understand that some people are not looking for the truth. They are simply trying to gain emotional control. Once you develop this inner stability, many manipulators gradually lose their influence over you, because they realize they can no longer use your fear of rejection to control your behavior. The sixth mental weapon against human manipulation that you must master is the art of intentionally slowing down emotional attachment. Most people place their trust far too quickly when they experience a powerful emotional connection. Jung explained that certain unconscious wounds drive people to immediately seek emotional fusion, validation, or security through others. Machiavelli understood that emotional urgency makes the mind vulnerable to illusion. That is why manipulators often try to speed up emotional bonds. They create a false sense of emotional urgency. Everything has to become deep, immediately. Exclusive, immediately. Important, immediately. Most people mistake this rapid acceleration for sincerity, when in reality, it is often designed to bypass careful observation. Pay close attention to this pattern in modern relationships. Some people try to gain access to your inner world far too quickly. They ask deeply personal questions almost immediately. They overshare intimate details. They create a level of emotional closeness that doesn't match the short amount of time you've actually known each other. Why? Because an emotionally overwhelmed mind analyzes far less. That is why slowing down becomes an incredibly powerful psychological weapon. A clear-minded person does not reject emotions. They simply refuse to let emotions take control before they have had enough time to observe someone's behavior. This discipline completely changes the way you read people. You begin looking for consistency instead of chasing emotional highs. You observe how someone behaves during conflict, during frustration, during scarcity, during disagreement. Because many masks can survive a few weeks of emotional intensity, very few can survive time, frustration, and stability. Understanding this protects you in powerful ways. Because a manipulative person often wants to enter your mind quickly before your clarity has enough time to build a solid foundation, while a genuinely sincere person is naturally comfortable letting trust develop at a slow, intentional pace. The seventh mental weapon against human manipulation that you must develop is probably the most powerful of them all. Learn to judge a relationship by the effect it has on your inner state, instead of listening only to words or outward intentions. Jung explained that the unconscious mind detects an incredible amount of information long before the conscious mind can fully understand it. Machiavelli already knew that our silent instincts often recognize truths that social logic later tries to suppress. That is why some relationships leave you with a strange feeling of unease, even when everything appears perfectly normal on the surface. Your energy becomes unsettled. Your mind grows more anxious. You begin doubting yourself far more than usual. Some conversations leave you emotionally drained for no obvious reason. Yet most people ignore these signals because there is still no visible proof that anything is wrong. They wait for an obvious betrayal before trusting their deepest instincts. But the unconscious often detects inconsistencies long before the intellect does. That is why learning to observe your psychological state after certain interactions becomes one of the most important mental weapons you can develop. A healthy relationship can go through conflict, disagreement, and moments of tension without slowly destroying your inner balance. Manipulative relationships, however, often create chronic psychological exhaustion. You constantly feel the need to analyze, to fix, to reassure, or to predict the other person's reactions. And that constant state of hypervigilance is an extremely important warning sign. Sincere people generally bring more inner clarity into your life over time. Manipulators often create more confusion. Understanding this completely transforms the way you evaluate relationships. You gradually stop judging people only by what they claim to intend. Instead, you pay attention to the invisible effects they have on your mind, your energy, and your inner peace. And that quiet awareness becomes a protection that very few manipulators can overcome. Most people spend their entire lives searching for complicated answers, when the signs have always been right in front of them. Betrayal, manipulation, and psychological games almost never appear without warning. The problem is that most people focus on words instead of behavior. They listen to their emotional needs instead of listening to their inner clarity. Machiavelli understood that power often belongs to those who can observe without being blinded by appearances. Jung discovered that the human shadow always ends up revealing what the mask tries to hide. And when you combine these two perspectives, something inside you begins to change. You slowly stop being naive. Without becoming cold, you learn to protect your mind without losing your humanity. You realize that some people don't enter your life to love you. They enter your life to take advantage of the wounded parts of you that have not yet healed. That realization becomes an invisible boundary between those who repeat the same painful patterns forever and those who finally begin to understand how human nature truly works. Because true power is not controlling other people. True power is no longer being unconsciously controlled by their emotional games, their silent manipulation, or their hidden contradictions. The more you develop this clarity, the more illusions will disappear from your life. Some relationships will change, some masks will fall, but in return, you will gain something incredibly rare in today's world: the ability to see people for who they truly are. If this video opened your eyes, subscribe to Hidden Oasis, like this video, and write in the comments, "I finally see beyond the masks." Because people who quietly understand human nature become almost impossible to manipulate.